The heist had gone off without a hitch, the culmination of months of planning and meticulous execution. Lucas, the mastermind, had orchestrated every detail, from the timing of the robbery to the escape route. Now the 5 thieves sped through the outskirts of the city in their stolen van, the weight of their loot, jewels worth millions, pressing down on their laps. The tension in the vehicle was palpable, but so was the thrill of their success. "Turn here," Lucas barked from the passenger seat, pointing to a narrow, unmarked dirt road that led away from the main highway. Sarah, the driver, nodded and made the sharp turn, sending a cloud of dust into the air behind them. The dense woods on either side of the road swallowed the van, concealing it from any prying eyes. As they navigated the winding path, Derek, seated in the back, couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see police lights piercing through the trees. "Are you sure this place is safe, Lucas?" he asked, his voice edged with doubt. "Positive," Lucas replied confidently. "I scouted it out myself. It's been abandoned for years. No one will think to look for us here." The path finally opened up to a clearing, and there it stood, the abandoned hotel. Its once grand facade was now a haunting silhouette against the darkening sky. Vines and ivy crawled up the sides of the building, and the windows were either broken or boarded up. The sign that once proudly announced the hotel's name was now illegible, the letters worn away by time and neglect. "Welcome to our home for the night," Lucas said with a smirk as they pulled the van to a stop behind a cluster of overgrown bushes. They quickly disembarked, unloading their gear and the bags of stolen jewels. The front entrance, a pair of large wooden doors, hung slightly ajar, creaking ominously as the wind pushed against them. Lucas led the way, flashlight in hand, illuminating the dusty lobby that lay beyond. The interior was just as decrepit as the exterior, with faded wallpaper peeling off the walls and a thick layer of dust covering every surface. An old chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, swaying gently as they passed beneath it. "Let's split up and secure the place," Lucas instructed. "Make sure all doors and windows are locked and see if we can find anything useful." The group dispersed, each member taking a different section of the hotel. Lucas and Sarah headed upstairs to check the guest rooms. Derek explored the lobby and adjoining rooms, while Nina and Jake ventured into the depths of the ground floor. As Lucas and Sarah climbed the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing through the empty hallways, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He paused at the top of the stairs, shining his flashlight down the corridor. The beam of light revealed a series of doors, all closed, leading to the rooms that once housed guests long gone. "You okay?" Sarah asked, noticing his hesitation. "Yeah," Lucas said, shaking off the feeling. "Just a little jumpy. Let's get this over with." They began checking the rooms one by one, finding nothing but dust-covered furniture and the occasional rodent scurrying away from the light. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Derek was rifling through an old reception desk, hoping to find anything that might provide clues about the hotel's history or useful supplies. He found a stack of yellowed guest registers, the entries dating back decades, but nothing that could help their current situation. Nina and Jake's exploration led them to the kitchen and storage rooms. The kitchen was a mess of rusted appliances and broken cabinets. "Looks like we won't be finding any snacks here," Jake joked, trying to lighten the mood. Nina forced a smile but couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled over her since they arrived. Back in the lobby, Lucas and Sarah rejoined Derek, having found nothing of significance upstairs. "Place is clear," Lucas announced. "Let's regroup and figure out our next move." The group reconvened in the lobby, setting up a makeshift camp with the supplies they had brought. As they settled in, the unease that had been gnawing at them since they arrived seemed to intensify. Shadows danced on the walls as their flashlights flickered, and the silence of the abandoned hotel felt almost oppressive. "We should take turns keeping watch," Lucas suggested, "just in case." The others nodded in agreement, and they drew straws to determine the order. Jake drew the first watch and took his position by the front door, flashlight in hand. As the rest of the group tried to get some rest, the old hotel seemed to come alive with creaks and groans, as if the very walls were whispering secrets of the past. Unbeknownst to them, hidden cameras, long forgotten by time, had been watching their every move. In a secret room deep within the bowels of the hotel, a gaunt figure with piercing eyes watched the monitors intently. The corners of his mouth curled into a sinister smile as he observed the new guests in his deadly domain. The traps were already set, and the game had just begun. As the night deepened, the abandoned hotel grew colder and more foreboding. The thieves, having fortified their temporary refuge as best they could, tried to rest amid the eerie silence. Jake, on his first watch, sat by the front door, his flashlight casting long, jittery shadows on the walls. The ancient building seemed to amplify every small sound, each creak and groan adding to his growing sense of unease. In the lobby, Lucas, Sarah, and Derek huddled together, their makeshift camp illuminated by the soft glow of battery-operated lanterns. They spoke in hushed tones, their words blending with the rustling of the wind outside and the distant sound of dripping water from somewhere within the hotel. "It's just nerves," Lucas assured them, his voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at him. "We've been through worse. We just need to lay low until morning, then we can figure out our next move." Nina and Jake had returned from their exploration of the kitchen and storage rooms, reporting back with a few cans of expired food and some dusty old blankets. They too felt the unsettling atmosphere, but like the others, they pushed it aside, focusing on the immediate need to stay hidden and safe. As Jake's watch dragged on, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He stood up and stretched, shining his flashlight around the room. The beam caught the edge of a portrait hanging crookedly on the wall, its faded colors and cracked glass giving it an eerie appearance. He approached the painting, reaching out to straighten it, but froze when he noticed something odd. Behind the glass, in the darkened reflection, he thought he saw a pair of eyes watching him. He quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. Shaking his head, Jake dismissed it as his mind playing tricks on him. He returned to his post, trying to stay alert. Meanwhile, in a secret room hidden deep within the hotel's basement, the deranged hotel owner, Mr. Thompson, watched the thieves' every move on a bank of old monitors. The flickering screens displayed various angles of the hotel, captured by the hidden cameras he had installed years ago. His gaunt face was illuminated by the ghostly glow of the screens, his eyes sharp and calculating. Mr. Thompson was a relic of the past, a once prominent figure who had lost everything. The hotel, once a grand establishment, had fallen into disrepair after a series of tragic events. He had stayed behind, consumed by madness and driven by a twisted sense of justice. Over the years, he had perfected his traps, turning the hotel into a deadly maze for those unfortunate enough to enter. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the table as he watched Jake patrol the lobby. The excitement of the hunt coursed through his veins. He had been waiting for new prey, and now they were here, unknowing and unprepared. Back in the lobby, Lucas was trying to get some sleep, but the cold floor and the ominous atmosphere made it difficult. Sarah, sensing his restlessness, whispered, "Do you think anyone will find us here?" "No," Lucas replied quietly. "This place is off the grid. We'll be safe for now. We just need to stay calm and stick to the plan." In the hidden room, Mr. Thompson switched his attention to the monitors showing the upper floors. He had rigged several traps throughout the hotel, each designed to maim or kill anyone who triggered them. His eyes gleamed with anticipation as he imagined the chaos that would soon unfold. Jake, still on edge, decided to do another round of the ground floor. As he walked down a dark hallway, his flashlight flickered, and for a moment, he was plunged into darkness. He smacked the flashlight, and the beam returned, stronger than before. The hallway stretched out before him, lined with closed doors and broken furniture. He passed by an old, ornate mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked. For a split second, he thought he saw a movement behind him in the reflection. He spun around, but again, there was nothing. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and his heart began to race. Suddenly, he heard a faint noise coming from behind one of the closed doors. It sounded like a soft scraping, followed by a low, almost imperceptible whisper. Jake approached the door cautiously, his flashlight held high. He reached out and slowly turned the doorknob, pushing the door open with a creak. Inside, the room was dark and empty, save for a few pieces of broken furniture and a thick layer of dust. The noise had stopped, and the whispering was gone. Jake took a step inside, his flashlight sweeping the room. As he moved further in, the door behind him silently closed, the latch clicking into place. Jake's flashlight flickered again, and this time it went out completely. He cursed under his breath, fumbling with the flashlight to get it working. The room plunged into darkness, and the air grew colder. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his leg. He looked down to see a wire tightening around his ankle, pulling him toward a hidden trapdoor in the floor. He struggled and kicked, but the wire was relentless, dragging him closer to the edge. In a final, desperate attempt, he reached for his knife, but it was too late. The trapdoor opened, and Jake was pulled into the darkness below, his screams echoing through the empty hotel. Back in the lobby, the others heard Jake's distant scream. They jumped to their feet, panic setting in. "Jake?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. "Where are you?" Lucas grabbed his flashlight and motioned for the others to follow. "We need to find him. Stay together and be careful. This place is more dangerous than we thought." As they ventured into the dark hallway, the feeling of being watched intensified, and the hotel seemed to close in around them. Little did they know they were walking straight into Mr. Thompson's deadly game. The group moved cautiously through the dark, narrow hallway, their flashlights barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. Every creak of the old floorboards and distant echo in the walls heightened their anxiety. Jake's scream had unsettled them, and the realization that they were not alone in the hotel gnawed at their nerves. "Jake," Lucas called out, his voice echoing off the decaying walls. There was no response, only the haunting silence that followed. Sarah, her hands trembling, kept close to Lucas. "We should have never come here," she whispered, her eyes darting to every shadow. Nina and Derek brought up the rear, their flashlights flickering as if the very darkness sought to extinguish them. "Did anyone else hear that whispering?" Nina asked, her voice barely a breath. "It's like the walls are alive." They reached the room where Jake had vanished, the door slightly ajar. Lucas cautiously pushed it open, his flashlight revealing the empty, dust-covered space. The trapdoor in the floor was closed, the wire that had ensnared Jake now coiled back into its hidden recess. "He must have gone through here," Lucas said, shining his flashlight on the trapdoor. He knelt down, examining the mechanism. "It's rigged. Someone set this up." Derek stepped forward, his face pale. "This isn't just an abandoned hotel. Someone is here and they're hunting us." The group exchanged fearful glances. The weight of Derek's words sank in, and the reality of their situation became terrifyingly clear. Lucas stood up, determination hardening his features. "We need to find Jake and get out of here. Stay close and watch each other's backs." They pried the trap door open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air was damp and cold, carrying the faint stench of decay. One by one they descended, the steps groaning under their weight. At the bottom they found themselves in a labyrinthine basement. The walls were lined with old medical equipment, rusted and long forgotten. The flickering lights revealed a macabre display of surgical tools and jars filled with unknown substances. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness hung around them. "This place is a nightmare," Sarah murmured, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. Lucas led the way, his flashlight revealing more unsettling sights, a row of rusted gurneys, chains hanging from the ceiling, and faded stains on the floor that spoke of unspeakable acts. As they moved deeper into the basement, they noticed old security cameras mounted in the corners, their lenses cracked but still operational. "Someone has been watching us," Nina said, her voice trembling. "This whole place is a trap." They continued forward, their senses on high alert. Suddenly they heard a faint sound, a muffled cry for help. It was Jake. They followed the sound, their pace quickening despite their fear. The cries led them to a locked metal door. Lucas tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Jake's in there," he said, urgency in his voice. "We need to find a way to open it." Derek searched the nearby tables, finding a set of old, rusty keys. He handed them to Lucas, who tried each one until the lock finally clicked open. They pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Jake was inside, bound to a chair, his face pale and drenched in sweat. He looked up as they entered, relief flooding his eyes. "Thank God you found me," he whispered, his voice weak. Lucas and Derek rushed to untie him, their fingers working quickly on the tight knots. "What happened?" Lucas asked, glancing around the room for any signs of their captor. Jake winced as the ropes were loosened. "I got caught in a trap. Whoever is doing this, they're playing with us. There are more traps, everywhere." As they freed Jake, the door behind them slammed shut with a resounding bang. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further. Panic set in as they realized they were now trapped. "What the hell is going on?" Nina cried, backing away from the door. Lucas banged on the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. "We need to find another way out," he said, his voice strained with frustration. Jake, now freed from his bonds, pointed to a vent in the corner of the room. "There's a ventilation system. It might lead us out of here." Without hesitation, they pried open the vent cover and one by one crawled into the narrow metal duct. The confined space made movement difficult, and the echoes of their crawling reverberated around them. The cold metal pressed against their skin, and the stale air was suffocating. As they navigated the maze of vents, they could hear faint sounds from the rooms above. Footsteps, distant laughter, and the occasional creak of floorboards. The realization that they were being stalked and watched from above sent chills down their spines. Suddenly, the vent ahead of them gave way, and Lucas, who was leading the group, tumbled into a hidden room below. The others quickly followed, finding themselves in a dark, spacious chamber filled with monitors and old surveillance equipment. It was the control room, the heart of the hotel's twisted surveillance system. On the screens, they could see various parts of the hotel, including the rooms they had just explored. The images were grainy, but it was clear that someone had been watching their every move. Lucas approached the monitors, his face pale with realization. "This is how they've been tracking us. They see everything." Sarah pointed to one of the screens, which showed the hidden room they had just escaped. A figure stood in the doorway, staring directly into the camera. It was Mr. Thompson, the deranged owner of the hotel, his eyes filled with malice and a twisted smile on his lips. "He's coming for us," Nina whispered, fear gripping her heart. Lucas turned to the group, his expression determined. "We need to destroy this place and get out of here. If we take out the control room, we might have a chance." With newfound resolve, they searched the room for anything they could use to sabotage the surveillance system. But as they worked, the walls seemed to close in, and the sinister presence of Mr. Thompson loomed ever closer. The hunt was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The group frantically searched the control room for anything they could use to destroy the surveillance equipment. Jake, still shaken but resolute, found a heavy metal pipe and began smashing the monitors one by one. The screens shattered, sparks flying, but the image of Mr. Thompson's twisted smile remained burned in their minds. Lucas rifled through a desk, uncovering a set of blueprints for the hotel. "Look at this," he said, spreading the plans out on the table. "These show all the hidden passages and trap mechanisms. If we can navigate our way through, we might find an exit." Sarah and Nina studied the blueprints, tracing the lines with their fingers. "There's an old service tunnel that runs beneath the hotel," Sarah pointed out. "It leads to a maintenance exit outside the building." "That's our way out," Lucas said. "But we have to move quickly. Thompson knows we're here, and he won't give us much time." They gathered their makeshift weapons and headed for the door, but as they opened it, an ear-piercing alarm blared through the hotel. Red emergency lights flashed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "He's activated the security system!" Nina shouted over the noise. "We need to hurry!" They sprinted down the corridor, following the blueprint's directions. The hotel seemed to come alive around them, the walls and floors shifting as hidden traps were triggered. Metal bars shot up from the floor, blocking their path, and flames erupted from concealed vents. They narrowly avoided each obstacle, their adrenaline driving them forward. As they reached the entrance to the service tunnel, a steel gate slammed shut, cutting off their escape. Lucas examined the mechanism, realizing it was controlled by an old electrical panel nearby. "I can override this," he said, prying open the panel and using the tools he found inside. Jake and Derek stood guard, their eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of Thompson. The alarm continued to blare, adding to the sense of urgency. Lucas worked quickly, his hands trembling as he rewired the circuits. Finally, the gate began to lift, creaking as it rose. "Go, go, go!" Lucas urged, waving them through. They entered the narrow, dark tunnel, the sound of the alarm fading behind them. The walls were damp, and the air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. Their flashlights flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the rough, uneven surfaces. "We're almost there," Sarah said, trying to keep their spirits up. "The exit should be just ahead." But as they turned a corner, they found their path blocked by a massive rusted door. It was bolted shut, the lock mechanism covered in grime and rust. Lucas and Jake set to work on the lock, their fingers moving with desperate speed. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the tunnel, and they turned to see Mr. Thompson standing at the entrance, a cruel smile on his face. He held a large, jagged knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "Welcome to my game," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Though his words were imagined, the group could feel the venom in his eyes. He took a step forward, and they realized there was no escape but through him. Lucas and Jake continued to work on the lock, their hands shaking with fear. Derek and Sarah stood between them and Thompson, their makeshift weapons raised in a futile attempt to defend themselves. Thompson lunged forward and the fight began. Derek swung the metal pipe, but Thompson dodged easily, his movements quick and precise. He slashed at Derek, cutting a deep gash in his arm. Derek cried out in pain, dropping the pipe. Sarah screamed and tried to fend off Thompson with a broken chair leg, but he grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she dropped the weapon. With a swift motion, he threw her against the wall, knocking the wind out of her. Just as Thompson was about to strike again, the lock on the door gave way, and it creaked open. "Run!" Lucas shouted, pulling Sarah to her feet. They scrambled through the door, leaving Derek behind as he struggled to hold off Thompson. The tunnel beyond was even darker and more confined, the air almost unbreathable. They stumbled forward, their lungs burning and their bodies aching. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, but finally they saw a faint light ahead. It was the exit. They burst through the door and into the cold night air, collapsing on the ground in exhaustion. For a moment they lay there, breathing heavily, the relief of escape washing over them. But their relief was short-lived. As they stood up, they realized they were not in the safety of the outside world, but in the courtyard of the hotel, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. They were still trapped. Thompson emerged from the tunnel behind them, his knife dripping with blood. "There's no escape," his presence seemed to say. "Welcome to my hotel. You're here forever." Lucas, Sarah, and Jake backed away, their hope turning to despair. They had come so close, only to find themselves ensnared in Thompson's cruel game once again. The hotel loomed around them, its dark windows like eyes watching their every move. In a final act of desperation, Lucas charged at Thompson, trying to overpower him. But Thompson was ready, and with a swift motion, he plunged the knife into Lucas's chest. Lucas fell to the ground, his life slipping away. Sarah and Jake could only watch in horror as their friend died before their eyes. Thompson approached them, his eyes filled with sadistic glee. "Now, who's next?" His presence seemed to whisper. As the night deepened and the cold set in, Sarah and Jake realized there was no escape. They were trapped in the hotel, pawns in Thompson's deadly game. The only question that remained was how long they could survive. Sarah and Jake stood in the cold courtyard, their breath visible in the frigid night air. Lucas lay lifeless at their feet, his eyes staring blankly into the darkness. Mr. Thompson, his knife glinting ominously, advanced towards them with slow, deliberate steps. The courtyard was silent except for the distant, eerie creak of the hotel's decaying structure. Fear and adrenaline coursed through Sarah's veins as she glanced around, searching for anything that could be used as a weapon. Jake, his face a mask of despair and determination, took a step back, positioning himself between Sarah and Thompson. "We can't just give up," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "There has to be a way out." Thompson's cruel smile widened as he heard Jake's words. "There's no escape," his eyes seemed to say. "This is my domain and you're my prey." Suddenly, Sarah's eyes locked onto a rusty metal rod lying near the base of the courtyard wall. Without a second thought, she lunged for it, grasping it tightly in her hands. The metal was cold and heavy, but it was their only chance. "Jake, get ready!" she shouted, raising the rod defensively. Jake nodded, his eyes never leaving Thompson. "We fight together," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. Thompson's gaze shifted between the two of them, calculating his next move. He lunged at Jake, the knife slicing through the air with deadly precision. Jake dodged, narrowly avoiding the blade, and swung his fist at Thompson's head. The blow connected, and Thompson staggered back, momentarily stunned. Sarah saw her opportunity and struck with all her strength. The metal rod collided with Thompson's arm, causing him to drop the knife with a pained grunt. But Thompson was quick to recover, his eyes blazing with fury. "Stay together," Sarah yelled, positioning herself beside Jake. Thompson attacked again, this time with raw aggression. He grabbed Jake by the collar and slammed him against the wall, his hands tightening around Jake's throat. Jake struggled, his face turning red as he gasped for air. Sarah swung the rod again, aiming for Thompson's head. The impact sent Thompson reeling, and he released his grip on Jake, who collapsed to the ground, coughing and clutching his throat. "Run, Jake," Sarah screamed, her voice filled with desperation. But Jake shook his head, refusing to leave her side. He stumbled to his feet, his eyes blazing with determination. "We end this together," he rasped. Thompson, recovering from the blow, lunged at Sarah. She swung the rod once more, but Thompson was ready. He grabbed the rod mid-swing, wrenching it from her hands with a vicious twist. Before she could react, he struck her across the face, sending her sprawling to the ground. Jake, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, tackled Thompson from behind. The two men tumbled to the ground, grappling fiercely. Jake landed a series of desperate punches, but Thompson, fueled by his deranged strength, managed to overpower him. Thompson pinned Jake to the ground, his hands wrapped around Jake's throat once more. Sarah, dazed and bleeding, crawled towards the knife that lay on the ground. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself to focus. With every ounce of strength left in her, she grasped the knife and lunged at Thompson. The blade sank into Thompson's side, and he let out a guttural scream. He released Jake and staggered back, clutching the wound. Blood poured from the gash, staining his clothes and pooling on the ground. Jake, gasping for breath, scrambled to his feet and rushed to Sarah's side. Together they watched as Thompson, weakened and enraged, fell to his knees. He looked up at them, his eyes filled with a mix of hatred and disbelief. "You think this is over?" his eyes seemed to say. "You'll never escape." With one final effort, Thompson lunged at them, but his strength failed him. He collapsed to the ground, his body twitching before finally going still. The courtyard fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of Sarah and Jake. They stood over Thompson's lifeless body, their minds struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The nightmare was finally over, but the horrors of the night would haunt them forever. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "We're free." Jake nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice filled with exhaustion and relief. They turned towards the hotel's main gate, their steps slow and unsteady. As they approached the gate, it creaked open, revealing the dark forest beyond. The night was still and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Hand in hand, Sarah and Jake stepped through the gate, leaving the horrors of the hotel behind. They walked into the darkness, the weight of their ordeal pressing down on them. But they were alive, and together they would find a way to move forward. As they disappeared into the forest, the hotel stood silent and empty once more, its dark windows like eyes watching their departure. The nightmare was over, but the echoes of the terror would linger in their hearts forever.